KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan Franklin Moriarty. Dagan.
Yes.
Yes.
I knew it. And
Now,
you are the Sally to my Franklin.
Certainly. And do you think the name Franklin now, do you think it was literal like FDR?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Because
it is a unique.
It was like 25 years before he died, probably maybe 30 years.
Okay.
28, 29. I was just wondering that. Anyway, we'll get into the movie in a second. Too soon. It's too soon. Dagan, how are you today, my friend? How's everything going?
Everything's good. Yeah, just chilling on this October Sunday. You know what's been aggravating me this week, man? I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this before, but I've thought of having this discussion with you. And I don't know how much you know about this because you don't really have to deal with this with work, I don't think. But maybe with some other stuff, I'm not sure. It's this dual authentication thing with all things internet related with work. So especially, I guess, I've been doing this for years with various places that I've worked, but now with COVID, I think, and just the state of internet security in general and hacking and everything has this dual authentication thing or triple authentication thing to access email, to access various websites, servers at work. And I have this one, I understand why it's implemented by the companies to, secure their privacy and not get hacked into for various reasons, financial and other reasons. But I have this one graphics server at work that it is like it's the equivalent of trying to access this impenetrable vault in a heist movie. It's almost, it takes minutes to do this thing. So this is what I have to do to access this specific server. Thank God I don't need it that often, but it's so aggravating. And talk about stymieing your creative momentum during the workday, where it's just like a brick wall that you run up against. So what I have to do for this server, I go to the site, I go to the link, enter my email or my user and my password, right? Then I have to take my phone, of course, type in the quick code to access my phone. I have to go to a specific authentication app, type in the code just to access the app. Then I have to go to the work link. It gives me a password that I have to type into the internet version of what I'm trying to access. Then that will give me another password to type into my phone. And only then will this thing open. The worst part of it is if I accidentally close this link and then have to access it again 5 minutes later, I have to do the whole thing all over again. It has no memory, which I guess is a purposeful thing, right? An extra security step where if I have to access this thing and I accidentally close the window, I have to type it in. I have to do the whole thing again. And it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but when you're trying to make some sort of forward progress during the day, you need to access this or reference a specific thing or get a clip or some sort of graphic, an EPS file or something. It's just like, oh my God, it's the most. And I have to do this for email as well. It's not as bad for the email or some of the other specific servers, but this one specific server, they have it locked down like Fort Knox. It's really aggravating. Now, have you had to, and again, I think this whole internet security thing has ratcheted up over the last couple of years with everybody working from home on their various devices and computers and stuff.
Totally.
But you don't have a lot of things. Do you guys have anything like this for Last Stand Media?
Oh, no. No. We're barely functioning on our end. No, we have nothing like that, but we don't have anything proprietary, really. I mean, I guess the worst things people can find would be like the documents to our new game at Lilymar or whatever, but even then it's like you're just ruining it for yourself. I don't know that
spoiler,
yeah. It would probably be awesome for our game, actually, for you to promote what it's about and all that, but yeah, I don't worry about that too much, but it's funny you say that because there's a lot of contention. I'm sure it's probably this way in your industry too, but in the games industry, a lot of people have to work on virtual machines basically in order to in order to do anything. But there's this, and I wonder if it's happening in your space too. There's a total unraveling of in-person work in the industry. Like, it's just, there's a confluence of high talent, high demand for that talent, and then those people being like, if you don't let me do what I want, I'll just go and work for these people. And I think I've said on the show before, I know people that have literally gotten paid 70, 90, 100% or more than what they make now to go to another company. And then those be like, you can work from home. So like,
wow.
So like an Unreal engineer, that's worth a lot of money with Unreal Engine 5 and all of that. You know, you make $150,000 now and you have to go into the work and all this. We'll pay you $270 and you can stay home.
That's insane.
And that's the kind of shit that's the kind of shit that's kind of going on. That's why I try to keep sending you job links when people are posting, like Insomniac was posting not too long ago about animators and all that. Like, these people just don't give a fuck anymore. But that's due to the nature of having to deal with that, because the talent simply doesn't want to come in anymore. So I would assume, I mean, not to be an asshole, but if you had a studio of all in-person talent, that studio is probably pound for pound worse than a studio that is able to attract the talent that's like, no, I don't need to do this. I have my pick of the litter. And it's like, as I said, when Sony bought Bungie, a third of that money, $1 billion, was only for employee retention. I mean, can you imagine that? So making millionaires, basically, keeping them forever.
Yeah. And just, sort of base level or maybe low officer level type creatives making, becoming millionaires or damn near millionaires. That's like CEO money in some companies.
Yeah, and you vest it, right, over years. And so like you have to stay to get the money. Because I think a lot of people are confused about that. It's like, well, why wouldn't they just leave? And it's like, well, you don't get anything. You can leave. You're just not getting shit. When you hit like year five, they'll be like, okay, here's your money. So you have to kind of earn it over time.
Very interesting.
Are you finding a similar talent rush in your industry?
I feel like things have been very comfortable. In animation, we've been very fortunate because with the offing of of COVID and everything, and the stymieing of live action production, right? They turned to animation largely for new stuff and to keep the wheels spinning for the various networks and subscription services. Right. So Netflix and then the usual suspects, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, Disney, Apple had a big part to play in commissioning animated series and, all the others, Paramount, Hulu, the rest. But I see now there's been some sort of sentiment by the animation community, the animators specifically, where it's like, well, we got you through this period and now you're kind of brushing us to the side. And I think what happened, why that became part of the conversation now, or a shift in the conversation, is because Cartoon Network is in trouble. And Cartoon Network was initially shutting down. Then Warner Brothers / Turner, whatever, came in and said, they're not shutting down. We're just folding them into Warner Brothers proper. But Cartoon Network is a big thing. Cartoon Network started this. You know what I mean? The cable 24-hour animation thing.
And even access to anime and all that. It's
really Toonami and Adult Swim. And really, I mean, they were the originators, so that was really troubling, I think, for animators. But basically, life goes on and everything's on the up and up, I think, in animation to some degree, as it has been, not to the degree that gaming is. I always threaten that I'm going to just stop, disappear for 3 years, learn to be a CG animator, learn Maya or learn Cinema 4D or whatever, and then come back so I could be marketable to those, I could go into those avenues if I choose to, or I could stay in TV or feature film, whatever. It's really still very appealing to me. But yeah, that's really interesting to hear about gaming. I think we've been very fortunate in TV and movies, animation specifically, but not quite to the degree of gaming. I definitely envy those guys as far as their, but they're in that position and they worked hard to get there. Right. And it is interesting that they hold that power now and that the companies have to kind of kowtow a little bit. I do see the companies, mine specifically, but my friends in other places too, like there is sort of a nudging now, a gentle nudging to come back to the office. I see them trying to institute that. And I almost feel bad for the corporations because nobody's budging.
That's the thing.
The writing on the wall. I saw this from miles away. Once people not only could do it and got comfortable, but also prove that they could be productive and fruitful with this model, what is going to be the incentive to return to work? Is it going to be, maybe it is, increasing salaries by 50 to 100% or more to get people back in the office. And then is it really worth it though? Or are you just kind of leaning on the old ways and, you know what I mean? Rid yourself of that overhead, for instance. Right?
I would agree. I mean, it's a complicated issue because I think I've said this on our other shows, I'm sure, but there was a revelation, I think, that was class-based during the pandemic, where the more, I don't want to, the white collar employees that tend to make more and have more comfortable jobs, like desk jobs or whatever, discovered that they could do even less and be just as productive. And what I mean by that is, like, they don't have to get up and get dressed. They don't have to get little Billy on the bus and then drive 45 minutes and pay for gas, and you get your morning coffee and all of that, and you go into the office. And they were just like, we don't have to do this, and we don't have to do it for you, and we don't have to do it for us. And I think that was a total revelatory thing. I read actually a lot about it because I'm fascinated about it, specifically because you and I both started working from home way before the pandemic.
Yes.
And I know you are the same. I'm like, I don't know why anyone would want to work in an office. I think it's hysterical that someone would actually want to go somewhere and work. Okay, cool. To each his own. But now I see more and more people coming to our side. And I think what a lot of people discovered, in my opinion, was I really spending 10 hours a week in a car? Was I real? Like, it's easy to say, I think about when I used to go to IGN and I would be on an hour, 30, 45 minutes, an hour one way on a subway.
Sure.
Depending on the state of the Soviet era subway system in San Francisco, and do that 5 times a week. So that could be 2 hours of your life. And I remember becoming cognizant of that, being like, what the fuck am I doing here? And this sucks. I'm getting up at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. I don't have to be at my desk until 9. And I think people were just like, this is insane. I'm not doing this anymore. And I really think you're right in that it was a backbreaker, because it showed that there was no lack of production. In fact, all these tech companies are worth more now. The overhead is less. I think the one major thing with the overhead is some of these companies, and I don't feel bad for them, it's just the nature of the beast, but Apple, for instance, I know because I have a ton of friends that work at Apple, a lot of ex-IGN people there, and they built up a literally like several $1 billion campus. That's like all those circular buildings people probably have seen, beautiful. And everyone's like, and they're the kinds of employees, like the top tier Apple type employees, guys that make steep 6 figures, right? Which most people at Apple do. I don't think people know that, but
Sure.
People at Apple make enormous amounts of money. And they're like, I don't think so, dude. You know, like, you know, so I think it's like a real estate problem, not only if you own it, but if you're leasing it. Commercial real estate, 20, 30, 50-year leases. Imagine if you lease something in like 2017 and then the COVID happened and your lease ends in 2057 and you have to figure out how to get people back into your building. It's urgent. And I also think the other thing is middle management. I hate middle management. I've always hated middle management. I started, as I've said and joked about in the past, I literally started just ignoring middle management at IGN and they left me alone, which is like one of my favorite stories. Like they'd email you and eventually you just ignore them. And then and you realize like they're not your manager and they're not like the publisher, like Pear or something.
Right.
And it's so funny. Like Steve Butts, who was the editor in chief when I quit, tried to get rid of me at that moment instead of giving me my 3 months notice. And Pear was like, I don't think so. He was in the room. So it's like, so like there was just all sorts of veto powers there. But I think, but I think it exposed, unfortunately, I'm going on and on here, but what I think it exposed, unfortunately, is blue collar work cannot be done that way.
No.
And this has created an even stauncher divide. Though I think I live in a pretty blue collar neighborhood, actually. It's really nice, but I think a lot of the people that live in this place, contractors, construction workers, that kind of thing. You know, some white collar, no doubt. But so I'm not saying they don't make any money, but I'm saying like you can't be a kitchen customizer from home. You can't be a building inspector from home. You can't deliver Amazon packages from home. You can't work at McDonald's from home.
Nope.
And I think that's been an exacerbating issue because now there really are people, and I see it in my own neighborhood because I'm home all the time. There's just those of us that don't leave.
Yeah.
walking
Oh,
the
yeah.
dogs at 11 a.m., hanging
Sure.
out, just going to the supermarket, doing whatever. And so I think that is the more significant problem, is the staunch divide between the it's not the haves and have-nots, but the people that have to go and the people that don't. And how, so imagine if you're a white collar worker parallel to that Amazon worker, and you used to get that 10 hours extra on the train, but you just got all that time back. Plus
Yeah.
you probably got a raise. Plus your life is way more comfortable. Even if you didn't get that time back, your life is just way better. You don't get up in the morning. You don't put on, you work in your pajamas. And then this dude has to like get up at 6, put on his fucking overalls, go to the warehouse. I'm like, that's the problem.
And I think that's a big, absolutely, dude. I mean, you just spoke it so perfectly. And I think that is the reason why they're having problems filling the blue collar jobs. You know, these are the men and women still on the road. They're still driving to and fro. They're still engaging in the rat race, even as insofar as the commute. You know, that's why the highways are still crowded and stuff like that, because there are a lot of people still that where life hasn't changed. Right. But I will say, you know, as a family man, especially, but I think this could speak to anybody, single, married, children, no children, whatever. Your value, your quality of life increased with just removing the commute, however long or short that was, right? And having to go back and forth to the office, that whole process. You like you said, you got that time back now. But, and I love that. And I don't even know how we did it. You know, even one person being able to stay home and work from home really just improves the overall quality of life.
Right, because that's a great example. Your wife is a teacher, so
she still
though she did some, I guess, remote learning. That's a horrible way to teach and a horrible way to learn. And so
it's a nightmare,
especially art. So she is one of those people that's just like, well, so she's got to go in still. But she's white collar, so that's an interesting thing. It's just, I find that like a lost conversation to me, because then I also think it exacerbates, is this going to exacerbate robotics? Is this a thing where it's kind of twisted? It's like, are the people working on these solutions at Uber from home making these really killer programs that are making it more likely that the people that still have to work remotely or work in person will no longer have any work at all? Very sinister Black Mirror type possibilities here.
It's a good point, dude. And you know, I will say though, I have to say, I don't miss it going back and being in the office with other creatives enough for me to be told to go back in no uncertain terms, like you have to return to the workplace all the time, full time. But I will say, I miss the in-house, in-person creative collaboration. And I do think it's bad for me personally right now, in a small way, in that it's making me a little more introverted, in that I find myself not wanting to be bothered. It's just like, I have my scenes, I have my work, I have my design work, I have my animation to do. I have that sentiment of leave me alone. And that's not always good because it's not challenging. I do feel a little bit in a rut as far as evolving creatively or artistically or professionally. I'm not sure really which, or maybe a little combination of all of those things. But I do feel that it's a little, you get a little bit, you kind of flatline a little bit. And this might just be a creative thing. It's where you're not getting that sort of inspiration. Iron is not sharpening iron because it's a little bit removed. It's a little less so. And I think doing it through a screen, collaborating through a screen is a little, it dilutes it. It dilutes the creative collaboration a little bit. So I do miss it a little, but I gotta tell you, man, it's like being engaged in watching a reality show or something, just watching the companies try to usher their workforce back into the building. And with my work, it's in Manhattan and it's on the Paramount lot in Hollywood, which is brand new. So they want to get people back in there because they paid however countless hundreds of millions of dollars to redo this facility, this giant complex. So yeah, it's interesting too that I feel a little bit bad for the companies, whether that's rightfully so or not.
I say
it's just
fuck them.
trying to get them back in there. Everybody's like digging in their heels. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
Fuck these companies. Most of these companies, God, I become such a populist, but most of these companies don't give a shit, you know? And to me, I'm like, whatever, man. I own a company. I own a small company. I watch these other companies coming and going in media, and I'm like, see ya, I guess.
Survival.
It's like, see. I mean, we're going to see you another time, perhaps. I don't know, but all right, let's get into that was interesting. It was an interesting conversation. Maybe a little tease of what's to come starting in January, but nonetheless, let's get into the topic at hand.
I'm ready.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, Tobe Hooper film. I watched this with Dad last night, actually. And Micah.
Oh, nice.
Dad was here, and he was staying with us. He was doing his rounds, but he was staying with us Friday and Saturday. So last night was Saturday. I was like, hey, we got home from Dana's, and I was like, I got to watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know if you're interested. So we sat down and watched it together. And I got to say, I rented this movie back on Netflix in the disc era, and I watched it at that time because in 2003, 2004, or something like that, there was a Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, which I went and saw with my girlfriend at the time in college. And I remember that. So I remember we prepared by watching the original one, because we used to just go to them. That was still kind of during the latter era of me going to the movies all the time. You just go to the movies and see things. And that was like, it was more boring back then. So I had seen this film, but I didn't really remember it very well. And I don't know why, probably because I've seen a million things in between now and then. But watching it again, what I came to realize was in the first half of the movie is a little weird. Like, I don't know if the surrealism is intentional. Like, it's a very surreal movie. It's that our dad was saying it was campy. And I'm like, yes, but is it supposed to be surreal? Like, there's something more to it, because they don't really position everything. And I know it's based on the Ed Gein or Gain shit and like digging up bodies, but they only really get into that in the beginning of the movie. It's very scattershot and almost incomprehensible for a while. The whole hitchhiker scene, it's all weird. But I want to say, like, the last third of the movie, when it's just that one girl and she's at the dinner table and all that, I'm like, this is like amazing horror. And the performances are amazing. It's fucking fanatically crazy. And Dad and I and Michael were reflecting afterwards. I was like, is this? I mean, and I haven't read much about it, and I don't know fucking anything about the history of horror movies really more than the average person. But I was like, is this the first archetype of this kind of movie? I know Psycho is before this, but other than that, there's not like any of the Hitchcock stuff. But there's no real, and obviously the schlock, but there's no real horror, I don't think, before this movie. At least in the slasher shit. And you could see the archetypes of slasher movies being developed. The teen kids, these disparate personalities. Something goes wrong. In this case, they have no gas, and they find themselves in the middle of nowhere, and they have to kind of explain certain things of why they can't leave, and one of them being handicapped and all the rest. And then they slowly get picked off one by one by this masked maniac. And I just think it's so interesting. I was like, wow, this is the beginning. I not really knowing so much of where precisely it came from. Like, this has to be the beginning of your Freddys and your Jasons and your Halloweens and Hellraisers and all the crazy fucking character-driven horror movies. So that was kind of my takeaway. I'm curious if any of that resonates with you. In other words, it starts off kind of weak and surreal, but I actually think it turns into an incredibly strong horror movie at the end.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, dude. I think this movie must have been absolutely fucking horrifying when it came out. Because, think about it. What you said, horror was relegated to something different before this movie came out. You had your Hammer. You had your Hitchcock, as you said. You had Romero's Night of the Living Dead 5 or 6 years earlier, which was, obviously completely so influential. But this was really the beginning of a lot of things. It was the beginning of the masked, murdering villain, the masked antagonist. It was the first time, I think, as far as I know, if not among the first times, that you're weaponizing power tools. And that set off a whole thing that was kind of horrifying. And there, for me, I remember this so well now, being a little kid growing up in the 80s in the VHS era, going to the video store on those weekend trips to rent something, and kind of knowing my personality, kind of wanting to scare myself and challenge myself, and going too far and seeing too much, putting myself through too much, and just kind of sneaking into the horror section and picking up the box, gawking at the cover illustrations, flipping them over, checking out the gruesome screenshots on the back, reading the blurbs, just getting as much as I can of the movie without actually seeing it. And this one, a lot of the times I could pull one over on mom and dad. I could go see something I shouldn't see. I could sneak onto Showtime and watch Poltergeist or watch The Thing, or some of the things the first Alien movie, some of the things I really shouldn't have seen at my age, but I needed to kind of engage in those things. But this one, for whatever reason, I don't know if dad brought this up to you or if he remembered, but this was on mom and dad's radar as you're not to go anywhere near this movie. And that only raised my interest to the next level. It's like, what is so crazy about this movie? And I think, in thinking back, they probably did think that this was based on a true story and that it was just too terrifying, almost faces of death level of horror, where it's like, that's too much for a kid. Like, even for that sort of laissez-faire 1970s parenting, it was like, that's a bridge too far. So I was specifically interested in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I also think the title was very visceral for a kid. It's like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It's an awesome title, dude. What an awesome title.
And looking at the boxes on the wall of the sequels, like the whole franchise, like I was really invested in, wow, what's so forbidden about this? It's like, I need to find out more. I need to get more. And as much as I could, I do remember going in there and looking at, whatever the cover illustration was. I remember there was various iterations of the VHS versions over the years. So I remember there was one with a close-up of Leatherface, and you could tell he had the human face, the human skin mask on and stuff like that. I was like, what is this all about? And growing up, not seeing it until, God, later in my teens or even maybe in my early 20s for the first time. So always kind of being haunted by what's that all about. And I think also just hearing about it in pop culture is like, that's one of the most terrifying movies. That's one of the scariest films. And probably a lot of people did come away with thinking that it was a true story. And, when you look at that opening crawl, that Star Wars like opening kind of screed on the screen, and it's worded very cleverly because you have to pay attention. It's not saying it's based on a true story. It's really just a preamble to what you're about to see. But because of the narrator and that specific voice and what it's saying, the wording very cleverly kind of leads you into like, oh my God, like this is a true story. And then it goes right into what I always took as like some sort of police forensic investigation with the flashbulbs and the quick glimpses of the horror, the gruesome, the bodies, and it almost seemed like a detective on the crime scene to me. So it's kind of sets the tone of like, this is the horrible tragedy that happened. Now we're going to go in and tell you why or how it happened.
Yeah,
which is very clever. It's a very clever delivery, and it's just there's so much to say about this movie. But yeah, I mean, and now it's almost a set piece, right? It's almost like watching Scooby-Doo or the Brady Bunch. But I think it would probably be more horrific and less campy when it first came out. I really try to channel that point of view of almost 50 years ago and say, wow, this movie must have been really, really, so it was completely new. Nothing like this had been seen. And I could only imagine what audiences must have think. And you could see like the way, almost like an Exorcist type of thing where people were passing out in the theaters. It was almost like a rite of passage to challenge yourself to see if you could actually get through the whole film. And it was banned in a lot of countries and all of that. I could see it. I could see that almost 5 decades ago of being like, wow, this was really a game changer for not just horror, but for film in general.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a film with a lot of vision. I think it's interesting. Just in reading just a little bit about it, made on a really lean budget. And you can kind of tell in some ways, I think towards the beginning of the movie, it looks a little more rushed and cheap. That's what's so surprising is when the movie should have been most challenging to present, it actually became compelling to the point of almost feeling real. Like the whole static shot dinner scene is like the acting, the characters going in, off and on the screen, sometimes for minutes at a time, coming back. Like fucking Leatherface is changing, which I think is so creepy. And just I gotta say, I know these were kind of a lot of random people in it. They're fucking awesome. More that the kids are fine, but the family is really nuts. Like how good the performance is. I love it. I was just really drawn in. It's just so strange that the easy things he kind of didn't do as well as the harder things. Like there's some weird VO issues, like where they clearly didn't record the audio at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
There's like the shots. It's hard for me to tell. I think it might have been real actually, but the low shots of them in the van together, I was like, they're in these white surroundings. And I'm like, are they just on a set? But then actually you go outside and it looks like that in the sky. So I'm like, I don't know. Did they film this just laying down? It's really smooth. So there's a lot of interesting things that I noticed. But one of the things that you're right about is the feeling of being real, even dating it, August 8th, 1973. So a date that has already happened. Everyone had experienced it, seeing it the year before. And I like that as well. And yeah, the light flash intro is very, very fancy, very well done. This is a pretty artistically shot movie. There's quite a few things. I even wrote in my notes here, I liked the use of lowercase letters, all lowercase lettering, which I thought was for the names of the actors and actresses, which I thought that's rare. That's weird. That's something you see a lot today in writing.
Yeah, very fashion forward for back then. Yeah, good catch.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty neat. And then I thought that there were like a lot of random, maybe they're not, but a lot of like red herrings or whatever too. The stuff with the Zodiac, like them going back to that over and over again. I didn't understand what that was all about. Maybe just saying that this was set in the stars, that this was going to happen. And I thought it was kind of a forward choice to have someone in a wheelchair at that time, 1974. So there's a lot of things that were striking me immediately, but nothing was striking me as being quality until basically it started going off. And I really enjoyed that as well. So talk to me a little bit about some of the features of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that stick out to you.
Yeah, you know what? That intro is really fashion forward. I love you bringing up the all lowercase text. That is really something that was far ahead of its time. And I think that during the opening credits, where you see sort of the red on black, I think it's actually telescopic view of like the sun. I think that's actually sun flares, but it kind of doubles as what could appear to be like blood under a microscope or something. It's very creepy. And then you juxtapose that with the creepy sound effects that sound like flash bulbs or a creaking door. It's very ominous and foreboding. And, you know, I love you bringing up Franklin being wheelchair bound, that you have this sort of paraplegic, because automatically, you know, like, shit, these kids are in trouble and this is going to slow them down. So now they're kind of, their speed is decreased by half because they're kind of encumbered by this wheelchair bound kid. You know what the first thing I thought of in watching it this time? I've only seen this movie a few times. It's not like I've seen it a ton of times, and I'm no horror expert. But I kind of looked into this a little bit as far as dates, because I feel like this movie, and I don't know if it's on purpose, it takes a little bit of that formula from Scooby-Doo. It's like 5 kids in a van, and Scooby-Doo, it's 4 kids and a dog in a van. And it's Scooby-Doo started about 5 or 6 years earlier. And I guess kind of hit its stride in popularity around the time this movie came out in October of 74. But I couldn't help but think of that. I was like, wow, that formula is very specific. Horror, they're traveling around in a van. They're looking into the kids in this movie are looking into a little bit of a mystery. But, you know, it was like almost like the same thing that I saw those little cues. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I wonder if they were even subconsciously channeling that classic 1970s formula, which was really something, kind of a funny connection that Hanna-Barbera and one of the scariest horror films of all time is really
has anyone written about that?
Funny thing. I didn't see anything about it. You know, it just occurred to me, maybe that's my animation side.
That could be your million view YouTube iceberg video.
Did Tobe Hooper channel Hanna-Barbera?
You're going to get all the late night stoners with that one. Trust me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's the whole thing, you know. And it's just really interesting. It really makes, every time I see something of this period, we've been going a lot, specifically with our KnockBack Halloween episodes this year. I think of Mom and Dad because they were so young. They were in their early 20s to mid 20s at the time this came out. And I had wondered, did Dad say that he saw this at the time it was in theaters?
I don't know, but he was referencing things in the movie like he had seen it, and then he was like, "Yeah, see, like he was talking about the barbecue and all that," and I was like,
Sure.
"Yeah, I guess you would definitely had seen it at some point because I was thinking about that. You would have been an infant when this came out in theaters, but maybe they went and saw it. Who knows? Maybe they had a date night or something. I don't know I don't know what their flavor was at that time.
They could have definitely, you know, and the thing is too, there's something that this movie does that I realized, and I was kind of tuning in a very squeamish way, thinking, all right, you're going to have to brace yourself for the gore, for the high level of blood, and just how gruesome things are going to get. Because I don't do well with that, right? We all know that. But this movie does not do that. You know, there's not a lot of visceral on-screen blood and gore. There's just enough where they really, what this movie does very cleverly, it does a lot of things. And I think there was a combination of things at play here. The very low budget. They shot this entire movie. They put this whole movie out for less than $150,000. That's insane. That's less than $1 million today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talk about a shoestring budget.
And it doesn't read like it, by the way.
It doesn't. It's beautifully shot. And, you know, also shot on 16 millimeter, which I have a tiny bit of practical experience with shooting 16 millimeter because I had to take traditional film classes in college that were electives. They basically didn't amount to much, but I got a little time shooting 16 mil and editing and stuff like that. And I remembered this, but what I read about shooting on 16 millimeter was that you need many times the light that you would need on a more improved, like a 35 millimeter film shoot because of the quality of 16 millimeter in general. So it's very hard to shoot with. And I do remember that, you know, like everything looks so dark, everything's kind of in shadow. It really stands out when you don't have adequate light for shooting. So I think it's really beautifully shot. And there's a lot of gorgeous shots in this movie. And then I was thinking on the other hand, Kyle, like, all right, exploitation, grindhouse, it's the 70s. So it's going to be like gratuitous sex and violence. And the whole thing is a vehicle for showing those things, you know, showcasing the sex, showcasing the sexiness, the gore and all of that kind of stuff. This movie's not really exploitation. If you look at other exploitation films, it really is. It has a lot more, I don't want to say integrity because exploitation is a different thing and it's fun in its own way too. And I'm not debating that, but this movie is actually more artistic than that. It has the tracking shots of the young girls from behind, maybe a couple of ass shots and stuff like that. But even those shots turn out to be, wow, look how smooth that dolly shot is. How did they do this on such a shoestring? I know it was all rented equipment and stuff like that. And I think what they do is they shoot things. So what they do, they'll shoot things from afar. They'll shoot from behind, or they'll shoot with some sort of obstructed frame where something's in the way. And that's for low budget. But also what happens is it leaves so much to your imagination. And what our imaginations could conjure in those instances is 10 times more horrifying than anything we could be spoon-fed. So we're kind of being led halfway and then asked to do the rest of the work. So a lot of the stuff, a lot of the gore and a lot of the violence is actually imagined. And it makes you think you're seeing more than you are. And there's not that much horror that does that so well. And I think that's what makes this movie so special. Now, also, what I was reading about this was Tobe Hooper. This guy must have been so insane. I really admire him as a filmmaker, but he wanted a PG rating for this movie. And that's insane to think about because I'm not even sure he set out to make something that turned out to be so terrifying, because he really thought that by doing these things and by showing less, he could secure a better rating and get more fannies in the seats. But what he ended up doing was making people think that they were seeing more than they are because he was such a skillful filmmaker. And I think that's a really big, interesting part of the conversation with this, because you think of what this movie turned out. Exploitation, let's say just the power tool genre. I remember I was there as a kid in the 80s in the video store, Driller Killer and horror about wood chippers and circular saws and any kind of horrifying, leaf blowers, whatever they could freaking come up with. They did.
Yeah, there was something about a leaf,
like
a wood chipper, the wood chipper man.
Oh, absolutely.
Something like that. Yeah,
axes. And this started that whole thing.
Yeah.
What the source material, what Texas Chainsaw Massacre did, the other things took it to the next level as far as on-screen spectacle. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't do that. It just made us feel like we were seeing that. And I just marvel at that, how they could do that. And also, I have to say, this is the perfect length of a horror film. I think, especially for this era, this genre, and kicking off all of these things, is that the length at, what is it, $1.15? It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's in and out. And I think also the note that it ends on, it's proper. It's a proper horrific. One of my favorite horror endings. I think it's just brilliant, and probably one of the things that wasn't sentimental. You're going outside of horror, so you're not dealing with Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the sea monsters, whatever. You're not dealing with Hitchcock, which is more psychological. It's more blunt force, realistic. Like, all right, one of the kids got away, and some of the perpetrators, some of these antagonists are still very much alive as that camera fades to black and we start rolling the credits. And I think that's one of the first times that was ever done. So I can, there's nothing comforting about this. Sent people home thinking like, oh shit, these guys could still be out there. I know as a kid, thank God it wasn't the New York Chainsaw Massacre, because I would have taken that and just psychologically tortured myself. The fact that it was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I was like, well, thank God. That's like 10 states away.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen here. I took a little comfort in that, at least. As a neurotic little kid.
Totally. I totally agree with you. I could see that as well. And I like the slaughterhouse imagery as well. I just think that that's cool. There's something... First of all, the use of that bolt gun or the idea of that is cool, because that was just in... No Country for Old Men we were talking about, which was cool. And of course, this is our second Tobe Hooper movie, because we did Poltergeist already.
Sure,
so we're touching on him again here. But a few things I wanted to touch on real quick. I just wanted to say, I like what you called out about the sun, because there's a lot of that imagery, and then they mirror that imagery over the moon. I think it's a way for them to tell time, because once to make sure it takes place over a day. Because I love when she busts out at the end of the house and it's dusk or dawn, and so it tells like the full story of the day. So there's something clever about that. But I wanted to talk to you about the slaughterhouses. Mm-hmm. It is kind of, they're talking about it in excruciating detail. And I don't know, it's kind of harsh when you think about it. What we're actually doing to these animals and all of this. But I love this idea of a person doing it and becoming so immune to what they're doing that they're able to just do it to people and just live this psychotic life. Like, in other words, you have to force people to do, like, someone's got to be the guy that kills the cows. Mm-hmm. But what does that do to the person that kills the cows? And I just thought that was kind of an interesting happenstance. I'm wondering if that stood out to you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The kind of becoming desensitized by that level of violence, definitely hard to see this movie as anything but an anti-meat screed. There's a little bit of that in there. I know Tobe Hooper was also making a statement apparently about the kind of overt sensationalism of specifically TV news at that time, and how the gruesome nature of just presenting human tragedy, and sort of like making a comment about the rubbernecking nature of humanity, which is really interesting. I think it's something that really bothered him and something that he wanted to put in there. And I think that's a little more sort of sneaky, but I think the anti-meat message is pretty clear. I mean, this is one of those films, I don't know, you're not usually this squeamish about, at least to my degree, to the levels I get caught, but like, this is one of the movies I can't eat when I'm watching. It's just, there's something too unsettling about it. Most horror movies that are gory, I couldn't really, like, I'm not gonna eat an Italian hoagie from Wawa while I'm watching that. I just can't do it. Maybe sunflower seeds I could choke down or something, but like certainly nothing concerning meat is going to be ingested while I'm watching a movie like this. But yeah, definitely like not only the nature of slaughtering animals for food, but sort of the old fashioned or antiquated way of doing it, where it's like they used to just do it with a sledgehammer, and the most skillful could just do it in one chuck until they got the bolt gun, which is I immediately, of course, as you said, thought of Anton Chigurh and No Country for Old Men. And I wonder if the Coens were channeling a little bit of Chainsaw and Tobe Hooper with that whole thing, because I haven't seen that come up in a lot of other films or fiction. So it seems like a direct reference back to Texas Chainsaw, which is a funny kind of thread.
Same locale. I mean, rural Texas.
Central Texas, sure. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Another thing that I wanted to talk about with you is just the I don't know, I have this hard time, and I wanted to see if you agree. We've talked about it in other shows, I think, but when they come to this old place, the characters are talking about it like a couple of them, I guess brother and sister, have been there in the past. And they're in their 20s maybe at the most, and so they were there 15 years ago, and she's going over like the wallpaper in the room and all of this, but it seems so quickly reclaimed compared to when they were there and how old they are. But then I keep watching these things on YouTube at night. So one of the like YouTube subgenres I like are like the urban decay or like rural decay videos where people just drive around and take videos of dead towns and all these different, and it's like you see like what could have been and what was there once, and it's very similar where it does actually seem to happen rather rapidly. What do you think about that? The Last of Us is actually another product that really challenges my conception of how quickly that could possibly happen. But is that something that's interesting to you, that the kind of you leave something and it gets reclaimed and it actually happens maybe quicker than you think?
Oh, absolutely. And really, that is always fascinating to me. And also just the kind of ever evolving nature of a place, maybe that changes for the worse over time. I think what they're kind of trying to, and it's not expertly crafted, and who knows what came out on the editing room floor and stuff, but I think what they're saying with this is this was once probably a more thriving area with the slaughterhouses, and they sort of insinuate that there was some sort of thing with the technology that put people out of work, and maybe this place is more depressed. It was a once thriving place that centered on this cattle trade or whatever, or this meat packing industry, but now the gas station doesn't even have gas when it needs it, type of thing. So this place becomes kind of a ghost town, which is great for a horror film because you know what these kids are getting into. There's not going to be anybody, when they run afoul of this evil, there's not going to be anybody there to help them. They're isolated, which is really clever, which I absolutely love. One thing I did think of, though, is that these kids are not in an alien environment. They're kind of this place. Maybe they're from Fort Worth or somewhere nearby that's a little more populated suburbs or cities where they're in a rural area, but they're not somewhere where they shouldn't be, where it might have been even more effective if these were kids from the Northeast. You know, these were a bunch of Long Island kids traveling in Texas. Right. They're strangers in a strange land.
A little more like Children of the Corn.
Absolutely. Same formula, where it's like you're thrusting these kids into this place where they don't know, you know, the customs. They don't know what to expect. They don't know the people. They don't know the attitudes. So that was one thing. It's like, well, these kids, not only are they of this place, they've been here before. But I guess the horrific nature of it is how much it's changed and how much it's sort of rotting away or eroding or becoming, you know, just sort of returning to the land or whatever, which is kind of fun. You know, it's kind of a fun little thing. And, you know, I think also they had to have some sort of loose plot of what these kids are doing there. I think they could have said, well, we're traveling to so-and-so, we're traveling to Nevada or Colorado, or we're on a road trip to California and we have to go through this place. That could have been just as effective. But just to give it a little backstory of like, oh, so-and-so, we're going to go visit this place where, for antiquity's sake, of where we grew up, or maybe we'll visit the graveyard. I think there's rumors of grave digging, which the movie actually starts with. One of the most gruesome scenes in the film, actually.
Yeah, it's it's like a total non sequitur. I guess it's just getting to them why they're out here.
Yeah. putting a little thing in there of, again, like exploitation insofar as like the character, the characterization, the plot, kind of an afterthought. It doesn't really need to exist. It's just about seeing this violence, seeing the sex, getting the scares, building the tension. But, you know, there is a little bit of those exploitation elements. So let's put this in real quick. It does seem like kind of like, you know, something to chuck in there as far as like give these kids a reason for being here. And it's not important, but at least it gave it enough, you know, a few minutes of thought in a script or whatever to put it in there. Give a little nod, humor us a little bit.
Indeed. And we haven't talked about the kids really very much. I don't know that there's much to say about them. We get to know them a little bit, but it's in such a surreal moment in the movie that you almost feel like, what is going on when they pick up the hitchhiker and he's cutting himself and he's cutting them. It's like, what is going on? This is so, I have to say that whole thing reads so strange. Horror movies typically start out pretty strong and end up getting schlocky. This movie is one of the reverse where it's like, geez, this is, at times I'm like, what? That's why I just assumed that there was more than was meeting the eye. Cause this is just too weird to me. But do you have anything to say about these different, you know, Marilyn Burns plays Sally, and we have a few other kind of bit actors that get into it. This is she, you know, I know the character Sally is considered the archetypical horror girl, the, you know, the last girl, whatever they call her, the screaming.
Last girl, right.
Yeah. And I know and her acting, I think she puts on a pretty awesome performance. When I see people acting this crazy on camera, I always think about just all of the people around them. I mean, you have to kind of put on no airs, right? And just those cool shots he does of Tobe Hooper does of her eyes and her screaming, all the close-ups or whatever. I was like, that's really visceral and pretty cool stuff, and looks great. It almost looks high resolution. Like a lot of the movie's fear comes from the low resolution nature of the way it was filmed. So like things aren't really properly shown a lot. There's a lot of blurry edges and all of that, but those particular shots are super high resolution. So I do
gorgeous.
dig that. But
Tobe Hooper, he would have been an amazing, I don't know what his art skills, what his art game was like, but he would have been an amazing comic book artist. I mean, the guy just thinks in shots. I think this movie is beautifully shot. That's something you never hear about it. You know, those close-ups, the environments, the atmosphere that he builds. I love that one of the early shots of seeing our heroes where it's just the flat horizontal horizon with the van coming through the frame and stopping on the right side of the frame. It's just really, really gorgeously shot. It's picturesque, actually, in a lot of terms. And the fact that he did that on 16 millimeter, I love, first of all, and I think this was probably a big part of the horror, especially back in 1974, was that this is a almost all but unknown cast of character players. Like, these were all unknown actors for the most part. 99% of people with their fannies in the seats wouldn't have known what they were looking at. And this is the reason why you don't cast Jack Nicholson in a horror film. I love Jack Nicholson, love The Shining. But if you want to really build sort of a sense of realism and naturalism in a horror film, cast unknowns. And I think the kids, for the most part, the young kids, our group of protagonists are okay. The guy who plays Franklin, that's Partain, right? Paul A. Partain. A little bit, I agree with Dad on that one. A little bit of a campy performance. But Marilyn Burns, dude, she floored me with her performance. It's so good. I mean, it's really, when you watch it from front to back, it's good throughout. But once the horror mounts up and she's, again, the last girl, she's the last survivor, and she's kind of running for her life, she puts on an amazing performance, because just being terrified with limited dialogue and then almost the level of horror that you're encountering almost turning to a madness is something that I think an actor could easily make into something that feels cartoony and fake. And for some reason, and by some crazy ability that she has, she keeps it very grounded, even though it's big. And it should be big because what she's going through, I mean, we put ourselves in her place as a viewer. It's like, wow, can you imagine going through this? And not only that, being in a place where no help is coming and you're seemingly on your own. You're the last one. You just lost your friends. You lost your brother, right? So she keeps it so real. I'm so impressed with the performance, and it really has held up through the test of time, I think. And then our antagonists, our group of inbred, cannibalistic murderers, are all excellent. I mean, the cook, the hitchhiker, and Leatherface, I think they all do an amazing job. So, as you said, when it culminates in that last scene, dinner table scene, and not to mention Grandpa, by the way, have to mention Grandpa. It's so pretty awesome. Horrifying.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's properly terrifying, and it does build. It's amazing that it's also a slow burn, because you could see in trying to create a horror film that's going to create a buzz and make a lot of money and put you on and be a means to an end for a career and to get the next thing and everything. You could see wanting to cut right to the chase, but I don't think Kirk is hit over the head with Leatherface's sledgehammer until like 35 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
And we do have the hitchhiker scene, and that's a little more strange and surreal than properly horrific, but the horror doesn't start until almost halfway through the film.
Totally.
And to have that kind of restraint and let it get to that point, really let it be a slow burn, let's savor it. And then, because I think this movie actually gets to the point where, let's say you heard the buzz on morning TV or in the newspapers and stuff, you finally got into the theater, got your ticket, you got your popcorn, you sat down a week into the film. You're probably sitting there for the first 20 to 30 minutes being like, this is what, and then the movie comes in, then it comes in and you're like, oh shit, this is what, so it's almost like it caught you slipping, it caught you doubting. And then it just, no pun intended, clobbers you over the head with the horror. And it's really kind of a clever formula. I love it.
Did you get any vibes? Like they show some viscera and some hanging bone pieces of art and all these like viscera packages and feathers and skeletons and all of this. This gave me real Blair Witch vibes. And I feel like Blair Witch almost must have taken it from this. So I couldn't have avoided that. But it also reminded me a little bit of True Detective season 1. Because there are things like that as well. You know what I'm talking about? Like the weird, you're walking through the woods and there's just like a hanging bones and like with like a piece of viscera and like a feather in it or something. And you're like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
That's like straight up Blair Witch to me.
Absolutely, dude.
Yeah. So I dug that. It's again, little touchstones. I just didn't know. I don't think I really understood how influential this film was. I knew it was an important movie in horror, but I didn't realize it basically was the slasher film in some way.
Yeah, it starts off the imagery. It crosses over into that occult imagery. It's like you're dealing with cannibals, you're dealing with murderers, you have the bones and you have the human remains and the skin and the furniture made out of human parts and all of these things. But it also crosses over into occult imagery. That red wall with the various cow skulls and goat skulls and stuff. It's like almost crosses over into a demonic where you're questioning, like, that sort of thing. Where it's, and like you said, with the feathers and, the cartilage and the leather and the bone mixed up with the bone and actually making creations out of these things, making art out of it, really.
Totally.
Crosses over into almost like witchcraft. So calling up Blair Witch and True Detective and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. I mean, I think this movie's influence is so far flung, even so many years later. It's like, and I haven't even seen the sequels, and I don't think I've seen any of the remakes. But just this first film is like, wow, like its influence is for 150 thou back in the mid 70s.
It's incredible.
Wow, it's incredible.
Yeah, it truly is, and it made a lot of money, man. I mean, which is great. Made Toby Hooper a millionaire, and you can see there's just a lot of vision here. And what's funny about it too, Dagan, and I was curious what you thought of this, was it's scary more by implication than anything. The violence isn't very bad.
No,
I like. There's a scene in the movie that I was like kind of like cringing, waiting for it to happen as you see it, which is when the second girl is being put, or I guess it was the first girl being put on the hook.
Oh,
and like the meat hook, but they don't show it. And Micah noted when we were watching, she was like, they would have totally shown that today.
Oh,
like going into her skin and all that. But I was like, they do a really nice job in this of not only, there's a different expectation back then. I think showing violence the way we show them in a slasher now would have really turned people off. It probably would have set a total different cadence for this movie. This movie probably would be renowned for something different, maybe even more renowned. Actually, I don't know, but I like that. It's surprising that this movie was so controversial because it's actually not violent.
Nope.
It's violent. The events are violent. The implication is violent, but you never see him pouring a slash of the blade through someone. You never see anyone getting stabbed, put on the hook. It's all just like even beat in the head. Like it's a faraway shot. And I know they did this so that they didn't have to do prosthetic and it would have probably cost so much more. And it would have looked like shit and all of the rest. But it's so funny because the movie, you know, when you break it down beat by beat, there's not a lot of crazy shit in this movie. It's just, it's happening. You're just not seeing it.
Yeah.
Does that make it scarier, or is that does that hold it back, do you think?
Yeah, it's the classic example of show don't tell. It gives us just enough and lets our imagination fill in the blanks. The meat hook scene I was dreading because you always hear about the meat hook scene. And it's so clever if you go back and look at it, Kyle. He takes the girl, you see the hooks first for probably about 10 seconds, and you know that's where she's going. And the other guys, he already knocked out the Kirk character, and he's going to cut him up with a chainsaw. But first he wants to hang this girl on the meat hook so she can't go anywhere. He kind of takes her, and he's this massive dude. He's like 6'7" or something. He takes her and hangs her on the meat hook. Now you see blood splash on the wall. So you know they've done this before, right? And they have the metal pan underneath to catch the blood. So you have these little details. And he puts her on the hook, and you only see it from the front. So you don't see it going in. You don't see the penetration. You see maybe a little blood spray, but there's no real on-screen visceral gore. But what you do see is the hook, the empty hook next to her. So you see exactly how fucking sharp that thing is. You see exactly how the sort of the girth of that hook, right? That this is a thick, sharp thing and has blood and dry blood on it and stuff. So you see her hanging on the one, but you see what the other one looks like. So you see exactly what's going into her, but without. So it's just that those clever bits of like giving it to you without and letting your imagination fill in the blanks. You know what I mean? Letting us conjure up the horror, which is so much more horrifying than anything you could spend money to show us on screen and kind of spoon feed. And also, I mean, of course, they didn't really have the money for squibs and sacks of expensive prosthetic blood and, you know, whatever sacks of animal guts that they would have to buy from a supplier. You know what I mean? They didn't have the money for that kind of stuff. So, but I think it worked out. Not only in Tobe Hooper crazily thinking he could get a PG rating for this movie, which is the most insane thing you could actually, he had to be half unhinged. But also in just that it worked out because, you know, we're asked to carry a little load as far as, and you come away thinking you saw it. And you know what, when you go back and you realize you didn't see that. You know what I mean? They made you think it's an illusion. It's smoke and mirrors, but it's so expertly devised. Like this guy, it's interesting that he was such a master of horror before he had really any work put in. It was almost like he was put on the planet to do this. It's amazing he gave us a body of work, but it's amazing he didn't become, you know, whatever that Hitchcock or Wes Craven or even John Carpenter type status, because I really think he did this well. I think he was, you know, put on the planet to give us horror of this magnitude. And also to just come in and just, I know at the time you're doing something like this, you never fully know how it's going to resonate, how it's going to come out publicly and how you're going to leave people wanting more, or if it's not going to catch on and ignite. But, you know, what this guy started is still going on. They're still building off of this groundwork, this bedrock. It's amazing. Yeah,
it is. That's I think the most remarkable part of the film. And I think another cool part of it is, you know, both in the era that it was filmed and in when it takes place. So 1973, 1974 is they have to write in certain things into the story to explain why they can't get away. And the worst thing is the gas. And what I think makes this movie so strong is you don't even have to pretend. It's like, well, why don't you have cell phone service? Why can't you figure something out? Why doesn't someone have Starlink or whatever? You know, like why doesn't your car hooked up to, you know, OnStar or whatever the hell would like help? And it's just so interesting to me that, and I mean, it's obvious, but in that era that you just didn't have to explain that stuff. That's true fear. It's not fear that you have to, it reminds me of that game I like, Until Dawn on PS4, the horror game where it's like, they're in Canada and they're like at a resort, so they don't get cell service, right?
Okay.
Like, okay, well, that's convenient, but there's got to be like some computer connected to the internet somewhere around you. Like, there's got to be some way for you to get somewhere to get cell service. But what I like about this is that it's like, I don't know, what are you going to have, like a Vietnam era radio to call home or something?
Sure.
There's
CB.
there's no phone at the gas station. They established that. And so I just think it's extra scary that they truly are disconnected in this situation. And I think it's similar to what we've said about other films. I love the idea of people in 1974 seeing this movie and going home. I just love the idea of them having no respite from it. And especially if you live in Texas. I mean, I'm sure people in Texas saw the movie.
Hell yeah. And Leatherface is still out there, man.
Yeah, hell yeah, he is. So yeah, I just dig I dig those little aspects of the time and place horror where it didn't have to justify anything. It's like The Witch, right? Like The Witch is scary because there really is no one there to help you.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's it. So you can just focus on the actual fear of the situation and you don't have to figure out how you have to convince the audience why no one is coming to help. And I think that this movie does that really well.
It does. Yeah. It's a great point because you could, in the 70s, in 1974, you really could be isolated. There was no satellite. There was no cellular. Everything wasn't built up. You weren't just a stone's throw away from the nearest town. Like, you could really be in the middle of nowhere with no help coming back then. I mean, I think in order to put yourself in that situation now, you really have to be remote. It would be much harder for an audience, as you said, Kyle, to suspend your disbelief about that. But back then, you could really, and you feel for them. You're in this inhospitable, sort of barren environment that just feels like nobody's coming. It just feels like it's not built for human growth. It's not built for human survival. It's hazy and it's dusty and it's stuffy and there's the oppressive heat, and it just seems very parched, and it seems like a place you wouldn't want to be. It seems like a place you wouldn't want to be stuck. I love the atmosphere that's created with just being in this place where it seems like very unappealing and unpleasant. And that really speaks of, it's dusty and it just seems like, man, can you get out of here? Like, can we get through this place so we could get to somewhere a little more, I don't know, a little more welcoming?
Totally. And one of the things I do think that the game or the movie does that's fascinating, that does establish why one thing is happening and the other thing is happening that I didn't realize until the movie was over, is I love that the generator noise is like a really fundamental part of the movie, in the fact that they keep hitting the horn, but the other people can't hear them, and even the family can't hear the horn of the car, so they actually don't know where they are. And so they're entering this situation where if they just didn't submit themselves to that, they probably would have been okay.
Yeah. So
like they really did happen onto this this truly unfortunate situation. Let's talk a little bit about Leatherface. This is a really terrifying and awesome character. I love it. I love when he's trying to communicate. There's that scene where he's explaining to the gas station attendant like where things are. He's like going in this corner and over here, and he's not really saying anything. The guy's like understanding him, and he keeps changing, which again, I just think that's so fucking scary and weird. And I don't know, I'm very compelled by this villain. I like how unclean and unkempt it all is. It's not one of these, later tight, shinier villains that you might see. And so I didn't really know much about this character, and I still don't. I think a chainsaw is just the ultimate scary implement to use. God. Not only because it's so powerful and just fuck you up, but because it's loud. So, and one thing about him, Dig, that I realized that breaks the archetype maybe a little bit is he runs, which is kind of scary, right? Like he's not one of those Michael Myers, I'm just going to walk at a calm pace, straightforward, which is in itself horrifying. Like, I'm just not going to stop coming at you.
Right.
But I'm just going to go at a very slow pace so you can run as quickly as you want, but eventually I'm going to catch up. Like, he's right behind her all the time. So it was interesting to see that kind of take on it too.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great point about the running. He's not going to, there's something horrifying about somebody who's on equal footing with you. Like he's going to run just as fast as you are. But the Michael Myers thing is equally terrifying because like that impending locomotive it doesn't matter. He knows he's going to get you. He doesn't have to move at the pace you're moving. It doesn't matter what you do. It's futile, even if he's walking. I love that. But what they did do, as far as I know, and again, I'm not a horror expert, but this had to be one of the first times of making not just the masked murdering villain, but the homicidal maniac with the mask, but also the mute killer in Michael Myers, in Jason Voorhees. Of course, Freddy is the antithesis of that. He's the wisecracking, wise ass guy. But, sort of I love that because I think what they had originally planned for Leatherface was that he had lines. He was going to speak. And I think this is 10 times scarier when there's obviously some sort of mental retardation going on. I think what they're saying in the movie is that this is an inbred family. You could kind of tell. We do see a glimpse of Leatherface's mouth, and he's got, that grill of, unkempt teeth, and he looks like he's a little deformed under there. And there's kind of what's also terrifying about this whole thing is there's some kind of familial hierarchy. We know we have the grandpa. I think I wanted to get your opinion on this, Kyle. The cook character is supposed to be the dad with the hitchhiker and Leatherface as the two sons. Is that what you got out of that?
Yes. That's how I understood it.
Yeah. And the cook could be an uncle, I guess.
Right.
But
and then
some sort of generational.
Right. And then it seems like Leatherface is playing like the female role.
Yes.
Right? Which
the
is
mom or yes. That's
like
the thing.
mask has like eyelashes and makeup on the mask, which is dope.
That's really, a great point.
Yeah, like blush.
Yeah, he's playing them. If they're doing this family role playing thing,
dude, it's awesome. It's awesome. I mean, that whole scene, I thought was phenomenal.
Oh,
I was actually like smitten with it. I was like, this is incredible. It was almost like watching a play in the sense that it's just this one scene, this one static shot at the end of the table, and they're like going in and out of the rooms and acting crazy, and knowing that these are just kind of like Central Texas maybe players or maybe not even actors per se. I thought it was like incredible. I thought it was totally incredible because they don't have anything to base it on. It's like, what are you telling them? How do you like Leatherface is acting like a nut job.
Yeah.
Like, how do you even say like, oh, act like Jason,
Right. They're they're blazing into this, previously untrodden territory. And it is weird because it just comes off as genuinely strange because they don't over explain anything. You just know that this is these people's way of doing things. They sit down, it's kind of normal in one sense insofar as they're sitting down for a family meal together, but the food happens to be humans, they're cannibals. And you have this setting with furniture made of human remains and, there's blood everywhere and pans to catch the human blood and body parts and chicken feathers and chickens in cages and shit. It's their normal, but it's horrific as far as our typical human standards of what we're used to, but it's their normal, and them treating it like it's their normal routine. It's it's their normal process of doing things, their customs. That's what makes it frightening. Cause like, look how these people live. Not only are they murdering people, you know what the other thing I caught, Kyle, that I never caught before? I don't even know why, but they have that camouflage sort of cargo net, brush net with all the cars underneath. That's right. And they're Volkswagen Bugs, like young kids, hippies cars. So they've done this they show you that crawl through that little junkyard of cars that they're hiding from surveillance, right? From helicopters and whatever else. And so they've been down this road many times, these cannibals, and these kids are just the latest victims. I love little shit like that because
I didn't think of that.
It doesn't beat you over the head with detail. It's like reading a good book. You just have to kind of catch all the clues and then build the story with what you're being told, what you're being shown, but you're not, they don't beat you over the head with like, look how many people they've killed before, type of thing. The other thing is you don't see, again, in that making us think, fooling us, duping us into thinking we're seeing more gore and more violence than we are. You never see this is a chainsaw massacre. You never see a limb getting dismembered, right?
Right.
They don't go in for those cheap scares. They really don't. And at the risk of making that severed arm look fake, they just kind of, for instance, when Franklin gets killed, it's just all shown from behind. You know what I mean? That chainsaw is going through his flesh. He's screaming and he's yelling, and he's getting murdered horrifically, but they have the restraint to not try to show too much. And again, just kind of building that into our imagination to make it, oh my God, what that must feel like, what that must look like. Like it's something you don't see typically in horror. It's much easier. And I think it's also kind of self-indulgent a little bit from the filmmaker standpoint, especially if you're a horror filmmaker. And I can understand that. Like, this is what you do. Like, this is your passion. You want to show this. This is everything you thrive on. But to actually kind of step back and say, well, let's not show it. Let's kind of let's make it a little more horrific by not showing it. Maybe we'll get that PG rating.
Yeah, get that coveted PG rating
as an extra bonus.
Yeah, it's the only violence that I can really think of that they show actively is when that little shot of Leatherface hitting himself in the leg, right towards the end.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and that is a little gruesome. That looks like almost like you took chicken out of a shrink wrap package, but it's so quick.
Right,
it's very realistic.
Yeah, it's cool, but well, I wanted to ask you that finally about the ending itself.
Oh man,
what do you make of the ending? What happens to that truck driver? What happened to him?
He just ran down the street.
Right, exactly. So it's like he's done. That's the thing, is this guy just comes over the top, not even really a word exchange, comes over the hill, and now he's in this situation, this incredible situation. Dad was actually saying while we were watching, like, why don't you get back in the truck? Which I thought was funny. But yeah, so that guy I assume is dead. I don't know. And then who is the other dude that came and got her?
The pickup truck guy, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. It would have been cool to see. Now it would have been hard because you have to kind of make sure that this is a remote area with not a lot of people coming by.
Right.
Right. You have to really build that sense of isolation. But it would have been interesting to see people just being like, straight up, fuck that, I'm not stopping, type of thing, which I think probably upon seeing this for the first time, you think the truck driver is just going to keep going. But he actually does try to do something heroic and help. And then you hope that guy gets away. He runs down the street. And I guess if you're rooting for that dude, you could say that Leatherface is doing his little dance and his little spin with the chainsaw at the end, and he's not pursuing him. So maybe that guy did have enough time to get away. But don't forget, the Cook character is still at large, and Grandpa, which I don't think Grandpa has too many days to go. Grandpa's on his last legs for sure.
No, I love that character. Like, he's sucking the blood off the chick's finger and stuff. I was like, oh my God. And the hammer when he's like trying to get it.
So crazy, that scene.
It's
but
awesome.
How about the hitchhiker scene of getting, that's probably the first real visceral punch as far as on-screen violence, where that guy just gets clobbered by the 18-wheeler, right? Where it's like a straight up dummy, but it probably doesn't look any different than, God forbid, that really happening. I think you may see, I didn't freeze frame this, I should have. I think you may see a little bit of stuffing or whatever that dummy is made of, like, fly out. But for the most part, it's like, that shocked me, because it's like, but it's also, what's also funny about that? It's a little Austin Powers. Because he's like, no, it's like,
yeah, but it's also like that because the car, when they show the footage of it getting hit, is going so slow. So that is also like Austin Powers, because the shot is definitely like from behind when they just show the other shot, the tracking shot, it's like going so slow, and then it speeds into the thing, like it murders.
That's probably one of the only hokey things really for me that I caught. It's like, all right, that was a bit of Austin Powers flavor right there. But really kind of the hitchhiker characters. I mean, were you getting the James Franco vibe from this guy?
I said that. Who did I said he looked like someone else. It might have been that.
I mean, he is like wily James Franco.
Oh, you know who I was saying he looked like was fuck. And it was John Leguizamo, I think was who I was saying the guy looked like.
Oh, you know what? You're right.
Yeah.
He's kind of John Leguizamo cross James Franco in a
Yeah,
weird way.
yeah, definitely.
Or maybe James Franco's brother.
The eldritch love child of those two men.
I also got serious Mike Brady vibes from Jerry.
Oh, definitely. That's
I was like,
time,
that's
man.
Mike Brady.
Yeah, Mike Brady. That's 73, 74. Mike Brady's fucking going.
That's
at
it.
that point. You know, he's still on. I think Brady Bunch is 68 to 74. I want to say something like that. So we're in the Cousin Oliver era, I think, at that point. But
oh my god!
But it's still going. Yeah.
Holy shit! I forgot about Oliver.
We got to do the Brady. We got to do a Brady Bunch retrospective at some time.
Oh my god,
dude! I used to love that show. I love that show. So
if not just the movies, right? Is there two movie?
Oh, dude, the movie. You know how we both love the movie. I think those movies are some of the funniest.
They're brilliant.
I think there are some people still to this day that watch those movies and don't understand why they're funny because they never really familiarize themselves with the original. You have
the series. Yeah.
They're nonsense if you don't, but otherwise it's hysterical. You know, I love that Cindy has a lisp and no one can understand what she's saying. It's so funny. And obviously the famous scene with Greg when he's and Marsha and they get carjacked. And he's like, yeah, he's like, yeah, this is a car, but I'm not Jack. I'm Greg. And this is my sister, Marsha. And the guy's just like,
it's an underappreciated gem.
Dude. And what's his name is, plays, why can't I think of his name?
I know who you're thinking of. I always forget his name too. From Better Call Saul.
Yeah.
And Laverne and Shirley.
Gary Cole is who I'm thinking of.
Oh, Gary Cole. Yes, of course. Yeah. And who else is in there? God, there's
Shelley Long is
Shelley Long.
Yeah, and it's Gary Cole. And Michael McKean is
Michael McKean. That's what I'm thinking.
Who you're thinking of? But dude, Gary Cole is fucking hysterical. If people watch the show Veep, which I highly recommend, I think that show is awesome on HBO. He is awesome.
I forgot. You always remind me that he's in that. Also, Office Space, of course.
Oh, in Office Space, yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I always forget he's in that.
He plays like he's like their analytics guy, and he's fucking hysterical. Like just absolutely amazing. That
he's one of those undersung comic dudes. You know what I mean? He's one of those guys who doesn't get Dodgeball. He's in Dodgeball.
Yeah, he's funny.
Right, with Jason Bateman. Yeah, he's great. You don't hear enough about him. He doesn't get enough appreciation, that guy.
And he seems to work a lot because I see him like he does like a lot of like turns in TV, like, you know, little guest starring turns.
Yeah,
he'll be in it something for a season, and
he's great. He's great. He's always good.
Yeah, but Bill Lumbergh, of course. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a Lumbergh fucked her. Oh, I love that movie so much. That's a wonderful one. I sometimes wear my my Office Space shirt with the company from it. What is it?
Initech?
Yeah, I have like an Initech shirt. All right. Is there anything else to say, Dig, about the 1974 classic horror film Texas Chainsaw Massacre? It's available to rent. I rented it, and you can get the various different versions of it. There's like I got the hour and a half, I guess, 40th anniversary version of it.
Oh yeah, I think that's what I ended up watching too. Yeah, it's on Amazon for free if you have Prime right now, I think.
Oh, okay, cool.
Oh, until, you know what it is? Amazon via Showtime, but only through the end of October.
Through Showtime.
So
okay,
if you're listening to this soon, watch it before Halloween.
Yeah, check it out.
You know what's something I realized, Kyle? In this, I never caught this before. They actually end up eating human meat because they go in and buy barbecue. Now, at least Franklin does. I don't think we see any of the other ones eating. But Franklin's got that sort of whatever hunk of meat sticking out of his mouth.
It's like a sausage.
And we find out later, of course, that barbecue place, the cook is the other two of the killers, but the cook is roasting that meat. That is not that is not pork, that is not beef, that is human meat. So that's another gruesome detail that, again, they don't hit you over the head with. They don't go through the scene of like, oh my God, and spitting out the food and we ate that. Like, it's just something another lingering detail that you're haunted with later on when you go home in 1974 in your Central Texas bed and Leatherface is still out there. And
do you think that
those kids ate it?
Do you think that he was trying, the gas station attendant was the cook trying to, in the beginning, did he want to keep them around or was he trying to get rid of them? Do you think? Like, he obviously says hang around for a while, but is he doing that because he's going to kill them, or is he doing that? I don't know. I just was wondering. I guess he has he does lie to them. I guess they could have gotten gas somewhere else, probably. But Do you think that this was gonna happen to them one way or the other?
Yeah, that's a great point. That Cook character is interesting because he has some sort of multiple personality bipolar thing going on, right? Where he's in one sense empathetic or sympathetic, but also like he's trying to console Sally when she's in the burlap sack while beating her with the broomstick.
Right.
At the same time. That little detail. So that is an interesting point. And I was fooled, and I've seen it before. I guess I just forgot. I was like, is this guy on the up and up, or is this guy affiliated with the killers? I forget. He had me going, is this guy just kind of stupid and slow, or is he kind of like, is this a trap? Then you're reminded, of course, it's a trap.
And cannibalism is just, it's weird. It's a weird thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
it doesn't scare me so much as it's just like, oh, the fuck? That's crazy. It's just crazy. It's not, I don't find it really scary. I guess if you were meat for someone else, and like you said, it's a commentary perhaps on factory farming, but
yeah,
otherwise, I don't know.
Like
it doesn't creep me. It doesn't creep me out just thinking about it. But I guess in seeing it in action, someone eating a sausage of human meat or something, I guess that's a different story entirely, but a common theme nonetheless.
I don't know. It has to be a disorder, right? Like I'm not trying to be all politically correct about cannibalism, but there has to be something wrong if now, okay, it's one of those, it's an interesting topic because, and not to linger on too long on this, but think about a survival situation, one of those horrific, what was that horrific movie that you were always haunted by? That mom showed you.
Oh, Alive.
Alive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're put in this, God forbid, this horrific situation where it comes down to survival of eating human meat, I guess you could almost, most people would still say I would never do that. But given the choice of like whatever diet you choose and opting in to eat people seems like a mental problem. But I'm just thinking about it insofar as terms of all living things, animals, right? I'm watching this documentary on Netflix, which is very good, Island of the Sea Wolves, which is a nature documentary about this far west Vancouver, 300-mile wide island off the coast of Vancouver where wildlife is crazy, thriving or whatever. And you have these sea wolves and stuff like that. But it's excellent. But there's a thing with bears, and that bears will, if pushed into a survival situation, especially before hibernation, will go after and eat the cubs of other bears. Now, that's cannibalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why? And I'm sure this exists. This type of dynamic exists in other instances in the animal kingdom, but I'm just using this as an example. So, is it crazy? I don't know. It's okay for bears, but bears are not, well, high up the food chain as far as intelligence, as far as like the pecking order in terms of the planet.
Humans are eating each other in all sorts of different societies and civilizations around the world as well. Probably to this day,
goes on now?
I would assume to this day in various places in the Amazon, maybe in Africa, and places that are, unintentionally untouched or left to their own devices. I wouldn't doubt that at all. There are apparently things going on in the Amazon like no one has any idea what's going on over there. But I would say that when we, not we, I mean, when the Europeans came here, a lot of, not a lot, but Native Americans were doing human sacrifices, and some of the massive empires in South and Central America were cannibals and all this. So who the hell knows? I mean, what's going on?
Maybe it'll come back into fashion.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Might have some sort of food shortage. The war in Ukraine's getting serious. So
isn't it interesting though? They had cannibalism at the center, and the other horror movies have done this since, but they had cannibalism at the center of this story. And again, it's like they don't beat you over the head with it. Because it is one of the most horrific angles.
You keep saying that term as I think about the guy hitting, Leatherface hitting.
It's just a proper. It's not. I'm not intending it, but it is kind of.
No, it's perfect. It's a perfect double entendre.
Yeah, yeah, but again, they don't. That's kind of an afterthought. Like it's an also ran, but it's more about this psycho killer with the human face, with the cross dressing and the chainsaw. Kyle, closing thought. How did nobody think to do a horror movie centered on a chainsaw before this? Chainsaw is one of the most, Power tools in general scare the hell out of me.
Yeah, me
Okay,
too.
I'm not dad. Apple fell far from the tree. We know the story.
Right.
But, and yeah, I know Driller Killer and every conceivable, power tool has been at the center of a horror movie since. Schlock, B movie, maybe it's great.
Shit,
maybe
even
it's
Dahmer, dude. I mean,
exploitation.
even Jeffrey Dahmer was using
Dahmer?
power tools. He was drilling people's holes into people's brains to try to make them, zombies, basically. And it worked.
Oh, that's another whole nother thing. Have you watched that?
No, yeah, I did. I watched both. They did like a real documentary and then like the fictionalized thing, and I watched them both. Yeah.
How was the fictional account? The series?
It was good. It's fucked.
Supposed to be.
What
good.
I like about it is that there's really no narrative drive to it. You're kind of like an observer.
Okay.
It's not through anyone's perspective, but through a generalized perspective. But you're just seeing almost like vignettes.
Yeah.
Really. So like things just happen, and it's kind of fucked. It's really well done.
It.
Yeah, I think
you should watch that.
You should. It's really good. I mean, it's very well done, and it's incredible what this guy was doing. And just getting away. What I was fascinated by specifically about him, and I didn't know this, was that he killed someone in like 1978 or 1977 or something, and then didn't kill anyone for 12 years or something.
Oh my God.
And then killed everyone else that he killed. Isn't that interesting?
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, that's like
he tried to suppress it. At least that's like what his whole thing is. Like he tried to suppress this whole thing. Yeah.
That's disturbing, dude.
Yeah. Really, really interesting stuff.
That's disturbing.
And that's the real life look at the horror, which is its own sort of, that's fun to watch too, just because it's like, wow, this actually did happen. That's way scarier in some way, but highly recommended to that as well. But yeah, this Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think it might be a straight up reboot happening soon if it didn't already happen.
There was 2 remakes. You were talking about the McConaughey Zellweger remake earlier, right? And
well, there's the Jessica Biel remake.
Yes.
And yeah, so I think this might be the 4th one. Plus there was like a sequel in the 80s, and then I think there was another one in the 90s, like a sequel, like a 3rd one. Because I think the original actress was in that one. Like, yeah, I don't know. So
yeah, Dennis Hopper was in the 2nd one.
Right. Apparently. That's right. Yeah. And it's very strange. I'm a little surprised that they didn't, it goes to show you what time we're talking about here, that their instinct wasn't to sequelize this immediately. I first of all think that was probably a mistake. I think they could have done a sequel in like 1975 or something. Something like right away, but
hell yeah,
that it comes from a different era, like of instinct, more restraint, where it's like, well, what are we going to do now? And I respect that, as opposed to saying, well, your movie cost $150,000 and made like $50 million, so we can probably make another one. That's probably the most obvious thing that we would do. So
yeah, not just milking a franchise anymore.
Yeah, so you have to respect that.
Listen, I used the chainsaw for the first time about 5 years ago.
Oh yeah, did you?
With Dad. I would only do it at Dad's behest. What had happened? I had an ash, not an ass, an ash tree in our backyard that was literally splitting down the middle. It almost looked like I got hit by lightning, which is very strange. These are the trees that they make baseball bats out of, PS, usually. So you can get a lot of money for the wood. And they're usually destroyed by that insect, the ash borer. But I didn't have an ash borer problem. This thing just split.
Ass borer.
The ass borer. That's another thing.
Yeah.
That's gotta be a porn movie. If it does already exist. You feel free to run with that. But the tree was gonna fall I was afraid because it was gonna fall into my neighbor's yard and their pool and everything. So I had Dad come out. Dad's like, we'll tackle it together. It was a big job. This was definitely fit for a tree service. But Dad came out not only with his saws, but with his chipper, towing his chipper. So another horrific power tool.
Yeah, Dad was amped. He was probably amped up for this, by the way.
He was so amped.
Yeah.
And he was in his glory, right? And I'm thinking like, sweet, like I'll go, I'm going to go out to Monte's. I'll get a nice lunch. He's like, oh no, you're fucking helping with this, because I'm not thinking I'm going to use the chainsaw. I'm horrified.
Right.
So he's like, oh no, you're going to be working with me. So he's doing the heavy lifting as far as cutting down the big branches and angling them and stuff. And they're falling into my yard. And I'm sort of going to work trying to make everything digestible for the chipper. So cutting down the logs and stuff like that. Dude, I almost cut my foot off like 4 times. And Dad is so like, I don't want to say laissez-faire, but I think he just thinks he's been using, I mean, his chainsaw could be an appendage. He's been doing it for that long that he knows these things inside and out. He rebuilds the engines and everything like that. So, and I don't really know what I'm doing. And he's telling me the basics, but yeah, dude, I'm just thinking I'm going to hurt myself. But in that experience, just doubling down on these things, power tools in general are terrifying to me, but chainsaw, I cannot even think of a more terrifying. These things are designed to cut down trees, huge trees. So how is Toby Hooper the first one to think about this as a centering a horror vehicle around this thing?
That's why I think it's so influential, because I just don't think the concept of horror existed like that yet. You know? It was schlock, not. Like it was nonsense. The Swamp Thing and shit like that. Like, I think that was like, that's good, that's fine. But it's funny that stuff doesn't really exist at all anymore. And now, and it hasn't really since this type of movie began. But we've hit so many of the classics over the last few weeks, which has been fun. But
we really have.
I have to point out to you, Dave, another quality YouTube subgenre video: tree felling. Guys that go in. These guys are nuts. These are people that like go into people's backyards and like scale these huge and they like hang their chainsaws like off their belts and like climb up and stuff.
Proper lumberjacks.
Right. It's crazy. It's really, really good shit. But sometimes I get a little mad seeing it because it's people that want these trees out off their yard, whatever. I'm like, dude, this tree is beautiful. Are you fucking crazy? Like, this beautiful, like they're in the Northwest, this beautiful evergreen tree. It's probably 100 years old. And I get that shit off my lawn or whatever.
That's hard.
And I'm like, you're an asshole.
This thing's been here like twice as long as you.
I know. Do you imagine this thing? This is kind of morbid, but I saw this people are just circulating it because they think it's funny, but it's this real thing where there's this new way to bury someone, I guess, where they bury you in like some sort of plant pod and then a tree will sprout out of the pod.
Oh.
And you basically are feeding the tree as you decompose.
Oh shit.
Yeah. And I'm kind of like,
how I feel about this.
I'm kind of into that a little bit.
I gotta say, I think this is really interesting. You could have a nest in you, a bird nest.
You could have
squirrel
one in
nest.
You right now. Yeah, squirrel nest. You have a squirrel nest in you right now.
I gotta let this digest. I don't know how I feel about this at first.
But yeah, shout out to the tree felling YouTube videos, and shout out to Dad. I mean, he came last time he was here. He's like, "Do you have anything that you need to do?" We have things that we do have things that we have to do. One thing that. Well, see, I'll say this first is that I said no to Dad because I have no problem hiring people to do things. It's just,
right.
I prefer that. And
when he comes and visits, let him relax.
Right, exactly.
Which
and
I
also,
don't do, but
also I know that he is going to try to coerce me into doing it with him. And I'm like, I'm not going down that road, dude. I'm going to pay someone to do it. I'll pay you to do it if you want.
That's exactly what's going to happen.
But I'm not, because I think he wants me to like, his thing is always very kind of like, well, you just don't know what you're doing. Like you could do it. And I'm like, no, Dad, I can't. Like, I did take shop class for a year. I did try to drill a fucking hole in the wall in my hallway downstairs, and just that went sideways. Just trying to do that. Micah is very handy, and she gave me. Micah went to like a trade high school. She was like she's like a bit of a machinist and all of that. What? And so she's like very, very handy. And she was like, "No, you can do it." And she like gave it to me. And I'm like, and I fucked up. I'm like, I told you not to give me.
Yeah, some people
I did get viscerally mad. Where I'm like, why doesn't anyone listen to me? Like, I'm not asking you to write words. Don't ask me to put the fucking, we
just don't have it.
I just don't want to do it. So
yeah, we just don't have. I feel like Dad was saying to me, like, you're gonna take the chainsaw. I don't think he wanted me to get hurt, but I think if I lost a finger, it would have been par for the like. All right, well. You know what I mean? Like, it's worth the risk. Like, I don't even think it was like I want to be proud of you thing. I think Dad's proud of us for who we are. I just think it was like trying to instill confidence, or just exactly what you said, like just not being so foreign to the concept of like, how can you not be able to do this? You know what I mean? But it's just like, I'm not tailor made for this. Like,
right. It would be like me going like, here, Dad. And for people that are listening, I'm holding up handing a PS4 controller.
I love that. I love the colors. I love the colors of that one.
Oh yeah, the Islander colors.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody. Hey, we're all built for different things. I tried the chainsaw thing. It was terrifying.
Yeah, I wouldn't use a chainsaw.
I'm not gonna. My neighbor was just asking me like last year, like, why don't you buy a chainsaw? And I was like, no, I'll call the tree service. It's fine. I'm good.
Why do everyone's gotta, I don't know. Everyone's trying to do things on the cheap, which I appreciate, but I do think it's like, actually, I had this conversation with Allie, sometimes listen, so maybe she'll hear this. Uncle Mike and her fiance, Jonathan, swapped their sink out in her kitchen, but in the process of doing that, like cracked something on her counter and like fucked it up permanently,
Oh no.
And I was like, this is why you just hire someone
for
$200 to just come and put it in. Like, why are we doing this? You don't know what you're doing. Why do people think? That's why I get a little annoyed at these Home Depot and Lowe's commercials, because I think it devalues blue collar work a little bit, where they're like, they're showing people like redoing the tiling in their bathroom. Like, dude,
no.
Do you have any idea how hard that is? I'm sure some people do that. I remember Dad used to have the books, like the actual books that you used to like go through, like how to wire a house and shit. Like we actually had to read shit. But I'm like, dude, you're encouraging people to fuck up really important stuff in their houses. They have no idea what they're doing. You're talking to an HR manager and like a fucking, history teacher. Just hire the contractor, for God's sake.
Hire the they developed their trade over years.
And that's what I was going to say was Dad is like, is there anything you need done? I'm like, clearly there is, because between Rush and Treble, every corner of our downstairs molding has been chewed into and destroyed.
Oh, yeah.
Every single corner. Like anywhere where there's a corner, gone. And they're getting better at it, but I'm like, it's like white trash central down here right now, but we're just trying to like let her grow out of it. And I'm
till
like,
they stop.
Right. And I'm like, I don't want to do it. So no, I'll hire someone to do it. Because I know the other answers. I'm like, if you want to do it, have at it. But you're not doing me any favors, because I'll just pay for someone to do it and you don't have to do anything. You can come watch them if you want.
You can come do my garage doors, Dad. If Colin doesn't want you, I'll take you.
You need garage doors? Is that what the new thing?
I have them and they were expensive. I don't want to have, if I don't have to pay to get them installed with the new openers and stuff, then come do it. I'm not doing electrical work. I am not touching
That's what I'm saying, Dagan.
I can't even clean the trap under my sink.
It's like, don't. Just hire someone. Just pay a few $100 to have the fucking doors installed. By someone that does it like 17 times a week, so they know what they're doing.
Yes, yeah, experts.
Right, exactly.
I don't want to do it. I don't even want to do it.
That's what I'm saying.
Even if I had the volition to do it, I don't want to do this.
Listen, if I didn't have any money and I was just living paycheck to paycheck, and my the wood downstairs looked like it did, I would just be like, that's just the way it's going to be forever, because I'm not doing it. But
oh my God, we should have a DIY homeowner podcast. It would be the worst.
Oh my God, it'd be so funny.
So great.
Like, it would be funny to flip a house, but like we have no idea what we're doing.
Oh my God, that's a great idea.
Like buying a house, like buying a cheap house in Mississippi or Alabama or something, and then learning how to do everything on that house. Like
that is a great idea.
The rules are we can't get any help. Like it's got like that. Those are the rules. Like you got to do it all just yourselves.
Dude, you just thought of like a $1 billion idea. $1 million.
And then everyone starts laughing. All right, my friend. That's it for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Let's end the episode as we always do with a dad joke.
Okay, James Ketchum, our pal, our friend. I've been sitting on this one. I think it's time.
Oh,
Kyle.
Yeah.
The urge to sing "The Lion Sleeps Tonight" is always just a whim away. A whim away, a whim away, a whim away.
That was pretty good.
Kyle liked that one.
Yeah, I like music. That doesn't.
I'll never do that again. Yeah, the dogs are freaking out. We won't build houses and we won't sing.
You ever sing and then put your finger over your ear to see how you actually sound?
Yeah, so you get the tone.
Yeah, like
it's never good.
No, you're never how you sound. Never how you feel.
Oh my God,
that sounded perfect to me. All right, let's get the hell out of here, Dagan. It was good to see you. Good to see all of you out there. Thank you for your love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand Media. Oh, by the way, they probably noticed it. I don't know if you can see this, Dig. You'll have to see it when we put the video up. I'm starting to get things on the shelf slowly.
I see it.
And this is Maria and Richter from
Look at that. I love
Castlevania.
it.
That's a double vinyl of Symphony of the Night. But,
beautiful.
Put out there. So
Classic.
that'll be there now for 3 months, and then I'll add something new.
That's a start.
Yeah. So I'm starting to get, well, it's funny. We knew Dad was coming, so we had things to do, and that just got me motivated to like start getting. When you're in kind of a holding pattern, I'm like, I can't really do any of the things I need to do right now because I'm waiting for someone to come here. So
Absolutely.
I just like started doing stuff in here.
That's always a good impetus to kick something off.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
All right, let's get the hell out of here. Dig.
All right.
Appreciate you. See you guys next time. Till then, goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.